If you were on the run from a tortured, demented child murderer, and by child murderer, I mean that they murdered a bunch of people when they were a child, although he does also murder children. Anyway, if you were running from Michael Myers and you didn't even know if he was supernatural or not yet because it's a fresh reboot, what would you do? Today we're here to break down the mistakes made, what they could have done differently, and how to beat Michael Myers and survive Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2. One lovely Halloween morning in Haddonfield, Illinois, the autumn leaves were falling, and the innocent children of the suburbs were getting ready to put on spooky costumes and beg strangers for candy, which is the exact opposite of what we teach them to do the whole rest of the year, just saying. Kinda mixed signals. One very innocent child is innocently wearing a clown mask and innocently playing with his innocent rat Elvis innocently. This is going to be totally fine, right? Speaking of totally fine, the rest of the family are already having breakfast downstairs, which seems to involve a lot of yelling at each other and really creative metaphors for various sexual acts. Deborah and Ronnie are not the ideal couple, and it doesn't make for a great environment for little sister Angel to grow up in. Fortunately, if you've seen the flick, you know she won't have to for very much longer. Big sister Judith comes downstairs, stays just long enough to get into a fight with Mom and get hit on by Ronnie, which I hope means he's not her bio dad, and then she goes up again to fetch Michael. Oh, by the way, their names are Deborah and Judith Myers, which makes Michael, you know who, not the Austin Powers guy, the other one. You know, the scary one. While Ronnie and Debbie completely demolish the kitchen, young Michael holes up in the bathroom and washes some fresh blood off of a pocket knife. And let's be honest, it's probably rat blood. Elvis the rat blood. But he goes downstairs and tells his mom Elvis died of natural causes, so he had to flush him. It's basically the perfect crime. There's no way he'll get caught unless, of course, he murders a bunch of people later on today. But that seems very unlikely, so let's continue. Judith and Ronnie both pick up Michael, who only seemed to have a soft spot for the baby, who he calls Boo. I mean, who could hate a baby? Probably Ronnie, as he seems pretty mad most of the time. At school that day, Mike runs into some classic asshole bullies in the restroom who pick on him because his mom's a stripper, and everyone gets into a brawl over it. Then, an old man who is either in very disturbing makeup or was hired specifically because his face looks like that, breaks it up and calls Judith to come pick Michael up early from school. This turns out to be more of a parent-teacher ambush though, because once she's there, the principal brings in Dr. Loomis, a psychologist, and says they found some disturbing things in Lil Mikey's locker that might make him a candidate for some advanced psychiatric care. Long story short, the kid loves animals, but he especially loves one specific thing about them: murdering them. Overhearing the conversation, Michael makes a break for it and runs out of the school, stopping only to grab his clown mask from his locker, which isn't a creepy impulse at all. Unfortunately, his bullies leaving the school at the same time. Oh no! If the bully spots Michael, the bully will probably beat him up. Oh wow. Never mind. That did not go the way I was thinking it would. Michael takes out his frustrations about his home life with a shovel, ultimately beating the bully to death and leaving his lifeless body in the woods. Okay, that was the first kill, so let's stop, take a look back, and see where things have already gone wrong. One of the big themes of the movie is that growing up in a terrible, violent environment can't help but mess someone up. So I guess my first piece of advice would be don't date guys like Ronnie, or throw plates at breakfast, or flirt with your girlfriend's kids. But as far as those issues go, it would take more than a 1-hour YouTube video to fix the Myers family. Maybe Dr. Loomis would be able to do it? I don't know. He seems like a bright guy. No, I'm talking about the other side of the coin. Let's look at this from the bully's point of view. First of all, it's highly likely that this kid is also not having the ideal childhood, which is often the case when people are this cartoonishly mean at that age. Even still, you'd think he'd at least be smart enough to pick his battles. Don't antagonize the same kid over and over, especially if he's got bags under his eyes and the stare of a killer. Spread the hate around a little, and never get in a fight in the heat of the moment. That's how you get caught. That's the exact reason bullies plan fights in advance, which we know you know how to do because when you first came onto the scene, you were literally talking about winning a fight you had planned. So keep your cool. Tell this kid to go meet you after school behind the gym and go from there. Oh, in case it's not clear, by go from there, I don't mean get hit once by a shovel and completely lose the will to live. I mean, this dude essentially wanted to get beaten to death by a much smaller kid. It's hard to beat someone with a shovel, honestly. That's why we have clubs. Sure, it's metal, but the end is big and flat like a paddle. So this much smaller kid is basically spanking you pretty hard, and you're going down for the count, begging for your life and bleeding from the eyes. At least kick his little legs, man. What is he, like 8 years old? And a word to Michael. Although it is his very first human kill, we should cut him some slack. You know what a shovel is great at? Having an edge. Next time, just pop that sucker under the bully's jaw and dig until they scream stop. A lot easier, a lot gorier, and frankly, more entertaining. You better really impress me with the next murder, Michael. Let's get back on track. That night, Ronnie is making fun of his girlfriend's children using homophobic slurs as usual. Mom Deborah is pretty upset that her son murders cats, as you might expect, but she promises that they'll start working on it tomorrow because she's gotta go out and strip tonight. It's Halloween after all. #priorities. That means that there's no one to take Michael out trick-or-treating. Ronnie could, in theory, but he's injured and also a very bad person. Judith could, in theory, but she's too busy getting busy with her dirtbag boyfriend up in her bedroom. So once again, Michael is left on his own, but maybe since he's dressed as a clown, the other kids will naturally want to gather around and be friends with him. Kids like clowns, right? So Michael decides to head back home, where Judith and her man are about to have, sex in a monster mask, which is totally normal thing to do on Halloween. Personally, I know when I get down, I like to throw on a Count Chocula mask. Moving on! After hanging out in the kitchen for a while, Michael unfortunately makes the worst decision that he possibly could. He eats some candy corn. Ugh! This naturally makes him decide to murder everyone in the house. Seriously, the candy corn pushes him right over the edge. He duct tapes Ronnie to the living room chair while he's sleeping, slits his throat with a kitchen knife, and stares coldly into his eyes as he bleeds out. It's messed up. Then, when the boyfriend comes down to grab a post-sex snack, Michael takes a bat to his skull and racks up kill number 3. At this point, I don't think he's going to be able to return that clown costume. Finding the discarded Michael Myers mask in Judith's room, Michael Myers puts it on and, surprisingly, totally looks like Michael Myers. Big Sis can't hear him sneak up on her with her headphones on, but that doesn't really matter because he stands there totally still for about 10 seconds, letting her hit him in the head. Of course, you can only hit Michael Myers in the head for so long before you're gonna get belly stabbed. And this is no exception. Judith makes it to the top of the hallway, and we get to see the very first time Michael ever slowly chased a victim down like a silent maniac. He gives his sister a few stabs in the back, pauses to admire his cool new look in the mirror, and then goes to check on baby Angel. He still likes. When Deborah comes home after work, she finds Michael and Angel sitting on the porch, the only survivors of Halloween night at the Myers house. Okay, listen up, y'all. You know your boy has all the streaming services, right? I mean, how couldn't I? I need to watch movies to make this channel work, but sometimes I sign up for a random one and then I totally forget about it only to get charged for it at the end of the month. And I mean, well, thanks to today's sponsor, Rocket Money, that is a thing of the past. You see, Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower your bills, and manage your money better. And I mean, on God, this is fire. This app lets you manage all of your finances in one place, from canceling unwanted subscriptions and lowering your bills to create a custom budget and growing your savings. I mean, I'm not even kidding. I love using Rocket Money to find and cancel those pesky subscriptions that I don't even use anymore, with just a few taps right within the app. No more wading through endless customer service menus. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when you use all of the app's features, with over $500,000 saved in canceled subscriptions alone. Take that, corporate America! So homies, take control of your finances today. Go to rocketmoney.com/how-to to get started for free and join me and over 5 million members. You can also unlock even more features with Rocket Money Premium. That's rocketmoney.com/how-to, or click the link in the description below. Now that we got our check right, let's get back to the show, shall we? Okay, this feels like another good stopping point, since it's Michael's very first killing spree and the last one he'll commit as a kid. He's still got a few years left before he grows into that mask. But aside from shutting down all the candy corn factories and killing everyone who knows the recipe, how could this tragedy have been averted? Again, the real-life answer probably has a lot to do with mental health care resources, support from the community, and developing communication skills. But obviously, we're not here to talk about all that. We're here for the kills, and that Ronnie kill honestly felt pretty nice. In movie terms, the guy really had it coming. So, at the risk of helping a total jerk survive next time, there are plenty of ways to make sure someone can't duct tape you entirely to a chair, like a mummy, without waking you up. First off, I'm assuming he's so deep asleep because he'd been drinking heavily. So you could cut that out if you knew ahead of time that you'd need to be on your guard. But Ronnie did not. So let's say you're already drunk, as is your God-given right, but you still don't want to have your throat slit in your sleep. There are many ways to tackle this problem. Sleep in a bedroom with a door that closes, and then lock that door. Oh, you're telling me there's no lock? Push a piece of furniture in front of that door. Even if you don't know ahead of time that Michael's going to snap and try and kill you tonight, you did just learn that he compulsively kills and tortures animals, and that the school's psychiatrist is deeply worried about his future behavior. Let's call those red flags. And call me crazy, but that feels like enough to justify putting a little bell on the door like they have at convenience stores, or even scattering some marbles around so your attacker at least has to contend with some kind of Home Alone level obstacle. Grease up the floor or something. But again, if you're drunk and lazy, just be inside a room with a door and you're basically golden. Honestly, the boyfriend was kind of doomed though. That's a tough one. He's in an unfamiliar environment. Michael's moving totally silently, has the drop on him, and takes him down with a single hit. Weirdly, I'm kind of okay with that though. It's like, yeah, get a job, you dirty hippie. Don't surprise the girl you're hooking up with a creepy mask. She wants to feel like she's in a safe situation. I'm not saying I'm glad he got killed with a bat, but I intentionally don't have any survival tips for him. Judith, on the other hand, I gotta tell you, hitting the creepy kid over and over in the head while he's staring at you with blood splatter on his clown costume, and they just told you he kills dogs and cats, it's not the first thing I would have done. First things first, if you're going to put on noise-canceling headphones, again, maybe lock your door, or just rock them on one ear, leaving your other ear free to scan for intruders and give you a cool, asymmetrical look. But even if you aren't constantly scanning for threats like me, once you're actually sitting there on the bed facing Michael, it's kinda hard to believe you didn't pick up on the "I'm totally about to murder you" vibes coming off of him. It's like you found a scorpion in the backyard and just started repeatedly poking it with your finger like, "And what are you gonna do about it?" I don't know, probably sting you? That's my guess. Then once she's stabbed, Judith's first move is to stagger out of the room, which means she had to get past Michael and down the hallway. If you're already bleeding out, fleeing isn't the best option. Passing out a few yards away from the kid with the knife is the same as just staying put. All your killer has to do is walk over to you, done. If your wound is so serious that you're limping and on the verge of unconsciousness, you should really be devoting all of your energy to doing anything you can to maximize your survival chances. As I mentioned, Judith had to walk around Michael to get away, which means that he was inactive for just a little bit, or at least stopped attacking her. That's your chance to fight back. Whatever that means, disarm or wreck that kid as best you can. Standing kick to the chest, roundhouse to the head, knee to the groin, a push out the door, and then lock it. Whatever you can accomplish with your last burst of strength. It's a slim hope, but again, this is a child. And rather than take advantage of that, all these people seem to just take one hit and then give up. Michael's not going to be a child much longer though. He's going to have to grow up fast, both because we know he turns out to be huge as an adult, and because he's convicted of multiple murders and sent back to a sanitarium, which is where Dr. Loomis finally gets a crack at that amazing, crazy brain of his. It turns out that Michael either doesn't remember the murders at all, or is at least pretending he doesn't. Even when Mom visits, he asks how everyone is at home, which is actually interesting to think about, because now that it's just her and the baby in a house with 2 recently freed up bedrooms, she can probably downsize or rent the space and stop stripping. She could spend more time at home, raise her baby in a safe environment, and maybe raise a good person instead of a maniac. I'm not saying it's good that Michael Myers killed all those people, I'm just saying it's funny how life works out sometimes. Anyway, Dr. Loomis doesn't really seem concerned with helping Michael as it turns out, more with making an interesting case study about how even little kids can be freaky, messed up weirdos. He's fascinated more than he is sympathetic, so we feel sad for Michael, even though he's deadly. Society failed him, and now society's going to live to regret that. One dark and stormy night, a sanitarium worker peeks in on Michael and gives him some tips on how to keep his head up in prison, which is probably the nicest thing anyone will ever do for him over the course of both of these movies. Also, bonus, the guard is Danny Trejo, aka Machete. So we might very well be in for a Michael Myers versus Machete fight by the end of this thing. Michael withdraws even further into himself and starts to make masks and color them black, saying that no one can see him that way. He says the masks hide his ugliness. It feels like on some level he feels so guilty about what he did that he just wants to disappear because he can't even face it. Of course, on another level, you just know he's hankering to stab some more fools. We see a little more of that side in some of the more heated sessions with Dr. Loomis, and for a minute, it really looks like Michael might go through some actual kind of mental healing process or grieving process. But instead of getting better, he just stops talking more and more, except to demand to be let out of the facility. His personality soon just boils down to wearing masks, not talking, and not being able to be contained by anything. Sound familiar? It's like Anakin just fell into the lava, and the lava set fire to Nibelheim, and Sephiroth is there looking at you through the fire. And to prove he's full-on Michael Myers now, he totally throat stabs a rude nurse with a fork and then just stands there staring at her. As they drag him away, Michael alternates between smiling and screaming, fully gone off the deep end. Deborah is so devastated by this that she takes her own life with a revolver, leaving Angel to grow up an orphan and Michael in prison for life. Okay, but you know who else should be in prison for life? Whoever let the convicted multiple murderer sociopath kid have a metal fork. I'm pretty sure that's a very basic policy when dealing with somebody who's been in an institution because they stabbed a bunch of people. What, they hadn't invented plastic sporks yet in the early 90s? Yeah, right. At least they have a guard in there. The staff of this sanitarium pays surprisingly little attention to the convicted multiple murderer they're supposedly supposed to be safely containing. Even as Michael slides further and further away from reality, Dr. Loomis watches and notices this, but doesn't increase the security around Michael, take any kind of special precautions with him, and even leaves him alone in rooms with other people, or lets him walk around outside with his mom. Maybe walking around outside would be good for him if we were actually trying to heal his trauma, but we've already proven that we aren't, so you're really just letting the monster out of the cage. Or at least in the cage next to a nurse who should have known better than to tell a kid wearing a homemade murder mask that he's ugly. The other death in this section is truly tragic. A mother leaving her baby alone and breaking under the strain of too much horror. Suicidal thoughts can be triggered by many things, and seeing your son stab a lady to death with a fork definitely falls into that category. Anyone facing feelings like that should know that suicide survivors are nearly always grateful that their attempts failed, and that those who seek help often see great outcomes. Life can look very bleak now, and still totally be worth living later. For example, Deborah definitely could have still found some joy in life raising Angel, but unfortunately couldn't see that through all the blood. Sorry to get a little serious for a minute, folks, but suicide is a serious issue, unlike stabbing a nurse in the throat in a horror movie, which is awesome and pretty hardcore. The murderer's allowed to do it, but you don't do it yourself. That's an easy survival tip. Don't kill yourself. Boom, survived. 15 years later, the nice Danny Trejo guard is training his replacement, a racist guard who you can immediately tell is definitely not going to make it out of this scene alive. They check in on Michael, whose cell is completely covered in homemade masks now. He's still got long hair and still doesn't talk, but he's also way bigger now. He's spent 20 years in the institution, and Dr. Loomis tells him it's time that even he finally stopped visiting. His case study is complete, and he turns it into a shock talk called The Devil's Eyes, that he tours around with, totally exploiting Michael's tragedy and discarding him once again to be left alone in a cage. He describes Michael as a psychopath who has no boundaries, which is weird because of the "he's in a cage" thing. Over at the cage, the racist guard has leveled up and become the racist guard. He and his cousin are planning to take advantage of one of the female patients, and oh my god, these guys are so dead. Then the cousin says that he's got a good idea, which turns out to be going next door and drunkenly messing with the giant, mass-murdering behemoth Michael Myers. I don't know what their definition of a good idea is, but now I kind of hope they survive just because it would be so incredibly surprising. Because Mikey eventually chokes one out and crushes one's head against the sanitarium wall. And like that, it's on. Now it doesn't matter if you're rude or not, he's the silent killing machine that we've all come to know and love. Michael immediately takes out the nurse at the front desk and a couple guards, leaving the one nice guard to clean up the mess, even though he was just like a week from retirement. Sucks. What sucks even more is that he drowns that guy and smashes his head with a TV. Michael Myers 1, Machete 0. A manhunt soon begins, as does a classic Michael Myers slow-motion killing spree. First, he takes out a trucker at a truck stop, which is the murderer equivalent of a quick warm-up stretch. The trucker even drops pickups like in a video game, so Michael has a knife and his signature filthy jumpsuit now, although he's still just wearing a mask made of a paper plate. Okay, quick pit stop for some quick survival tips that I feel like I really shouldn't even have to explain. 1. Don't literally intentionally unlock the murderer's cage. Go in there, do horrible stuff as obnoxiously as possible, then act totally surprised when you end up taking a wall to the head. This is so easy to do. Just don't do that entire chain of stupid decisions. That's 1. 2, if you're appealing to any last shred of humanity the monster might have inside, don't then try to handcuff him. That's just gonna set him off, Danny Trejo. Your top priority should have been to just back away slowly and flee the area to get help. It's not your job to single-handedly catch this guy. They don't even pay you enough for that. And finally, 3. If you're gonna whip out a big ol' knife to stab a man in the truck stop toilets, go ahead and stab that man. Don't talk shit at him and brandish the knife. Just stab, stab, stab. Stab first and talk shit later. Trust me, it's much easier to dunk on someone after they've been stabbed rather than before. Halloween Day dawns again in Haddonfield, and a new character, Laurie Strode, is pissing her mom off by having finger sex with a bagel. Is that something I'm allowed to say on the internet? Her parents seem fine, and she's perfectly nice. She's having like the totally normal, boring, suburban growing up experience instead of the blood-soaked alcoholic stepdad version. Gee, I hope no one comes along to ruin that for her. Just then, Michael blows into town, digs up his old mask, and somehow says, with only his eyes, "I'm going to ruin that for her." Laurie even comes to his front door to deliver some mail, and we see Michael's sort of imprint on her. He's clearly fascinated. If there was any question about that, there definitely isn't after he follows her to school and stands across the street, staring at her through the window. Elsewhere, Dr. Loomis, the police chief, and the warden of the institute argue about what to do next. If you know your horror and film history, you'll know that even more importantly, this is a scene with Malcolm McDowell, Udo Kier, and Clint Howard all yelling at each other, which is a pretty epic mashup. Ultimately, all three are more interested in how they can avoid the blame than how they can bring Michael down, at least for now. But they do correctly guess where he's probably headed. Back in Haddonfield, Laurie and her sassy girlfriends are teenagering their way down the street after school, spot Michael, and shout at him until he wanders off. One of their dads comes by and offers to escort them home in his cop car, but Laurie elects to walk home all the way alone instead. So you know her survival skills are on point. Michael chooses not to take advantage of this just yet, but does quickly murder Lori's friend and her boyfriend for having sexy time in his old room, even dressing as a dorky ghost, even though you're already wearing a costume under that. Double Halloween costume, baby. Man, he really is a psycho. Like, who does that? Next, Michael kills his way one step closer to Lori by murdering both of her parents while she's out babysitting. Dr. Loomis buys a big gun and tries to convince the local police to begin a manhunt. But that's slow going because they all think that he's just trying to exploit the situation to sell more books. While they're busy arguing about what to do, Michael ambushes Lori's other friend while she's having sex with her boyfriend and cuts up both of them. He just doesn't like sex, you guys. Stop having sex at him, please. Loomis and the sheriff, played by Brad Dourif, are on the way, and everything's headed for a final showdown. Just before things get really crazy though, the sheriff tells Loomis that Lori is actually Angel Myers, who grew up and got adopted by the Strode family. So is Michael actually closing in to kill her, or does he just sense that she's his sibling? We'll definitely find out in just a minute, but we also just racked up 6 kills, so it's time to talk about it. Amazingly, those last 6 kills are in 3 sets of couples in the middle of getting busy. Lori's parents talk about how they're going to have sex that night. Lori's friend and her dude get killed in the middle of having sex, and the dorky ghost couple get killed just minutes after finishing having sex. I don't know what it means or why Michael Myers hates sex so much, but identifying a killer's patterns can be one very powerful survival tool. All Loomis keeps saying is, he's crazy, he's a psycho, he knows no bounds. Dude, he's also a human man with seemingly no superpowers except maybe a weak mystical connection to Lori. He's got likes and dislikes and obvious patterns. He strikes at vulnerable young couples alone in their suburban homes. There's a lot you can do with that information, like narrowing the area the police are searching or calling an emergency curfew and getting the trick-or-treaters off the street. Mainly though, just don't have sex. He's a big fan of one kind of penetration, but not so much the other. Okay, climax time. Lori checks in on her friend only to find her bleeding on the floor and her boyfriend hanging from the ceiling with a pumpkin on his head. She calls the cops, but what she doesn't realize is Michael's already totally in the house with her. She finds out pretty quickly though, and he slow motion chases her out of the back window, through the neighborhood, and back to the house she was babysitting at, where she locks herself in the bathroom with the 2 little ones. Just then, the cops show up, but prove to be no match for Mikey, who stabs the 2, takes a bullet like it's nothing, and drags Lori off screaming to take her to the ruins of their childhood home. Dr. Loomis once again correctly guesses where Michael's probably headed and goes there with his big damn gun to take matters into his own hands. You know how when somebody is deeply disturbed, it's their psychologist's job to put them down like an animal? Yeah. That's how that works. At first, it's pretty clear Michael isn't going to kill Lori. He takes off his mask, shows her his face, and the Myers gravestone he stole for her. All kinds of normal Big Brother stuff. He even refuses to fight back when she gets her hands on his kitchen knife and buries it in his shoulder. Basically, he only gets triggered when she tries to break out of the basement and leave him behind. Guy clearly has some very serious abandonment issues. The big chase ends in an empty pool, and it looks like Lori's toast until the real hero of the movie, a big huge gun, shows up just in time to shoot Michael in the back a bunch of times. Dr. Loomis is there also. He guides Lori away from the site, and it's still honestly a little unclear whether Michael actually planned to hurt her or was just trying to be close to his sister again. It's a tragic tale with an ending that, whoa! So maybe he is a bit supernatural, or maybe he's just that hard to kill. Either way, Loomis sacrifices himself, or at least his eyeballs, to distract Michael and give Lori a chance to crawl away. She hides in the space between the walls, and a very lethal game of hide-and-seek between brother and sister starts to play out. Fortunately for our final girl, it's pretty hard to see out of the rubber mask, and he has to resort to just randomly knocking various walls down. She's able to get a hold of Loomis's gun and runs up to the attic, followed closely by Michael. He ultimately busts up through the ceiling until she falls through it. Dazed, Lori raises the gun to fire just as Big Bro charges into her and they both go off the balcony. She wakes up on top of Michael, who appears to be unconscious for the first time. police sirens approach as she points the gun point blank at his head and pulls the trigger. After a very few tense, empty clicks, Laurie finally headshots him just as he reaches out to grab her wrist. Of course, that only takes us to the end of Halloween 1, so you might be able to guess that headshot was more of a head graze. And Michael isn't down for the count quite yet. Let's just say that Mr. Zombie isn't the only one coming back from the dead. Incidentally, this is why you always check the body. I know, Laurie's been through a lot, but if you finally get the drop on an actual monster and are in a position where you've just shot them in the head, maybe shoot them in the head again a couple more times. Or at least rip that damn mask off and confirm the kill. If that's too much to expect from Laurie, we've got to at least wonder why none of the police or paramedics noticed that the 7-foot 14-inch psychopath was just dazed and not merely dead. That's a crucial distinction to make before you load the guy into the back of an ambulance, boys. But as Halloween 2 kicks off, that's just what they do. And it works out like you would expect, with 1 dead cow, 1 crashed ambulance, 2 dead paramedics, and 1 Michael Myers back on the loose. He even fully saws off a guy's entire head with a single shard of glass, which frankly seems physically impossible. He also sees a vision of his mother with a white horse, a reoccurring image that represents his unstoppable emotional drive to violence. Over at the hospital, a very injured post-op Laurie Strode wakes up and checks on her stabbed-up friend Lindsay, when she suddenly finds that the hospital has gone empty and silent as if by magic. The one nurse she runs into has already been stabbed in the face, and guess what? Michael's right here, right now. Man, that was fast. We're like 10 minutes into the sequel, you guys. Michael wastes no time stabbing the nurse to death repeatedly and falling back into his old habit of chasing his little sister around for funsies. She hobbles through the hospital parking lot in the rain while he nabs a fire axe and uses it to murder Richard Reel, one of the most used that guys of all time. Seriously, he's been in over 400 movies and shows, this guy. He's not in this one anymore though. Michael breaks in by demolishing the whole building Laurie's in like the damn Kool-Aid Man, then totally kills her with the axe, which, it turns out, is just a trauma-induced nightmare that Laurie wakes up from screaming. It's actually been 2 years since the events of the first film, but obviously, Laurie hasn't fully gotten over it. Now, Halloween is only 3 days away, which doesn't tend to be the best time for her. We find out she moved in with Sheriff Brackett and his daughter Annie, the one who got slashed up but didn't die, that is, and that she resents having to go to therapy where she feels like she isn't making much progress. Everything reminds her of Michael, from Annie's facial scars to the ink blot on the wall that looks like white horses. See? It turns out Michael's not the only one filled with an urge to violence. That's what happens when you go around and ruin someone's childhood, as we found out the first time around. Also, much like the first time around, we're barely through Act 1, and there's already a concerning lack of survivability on display here. In a weird way, it almost feels like the characters haven't learned much in between. That would make sense if these events really did occur right after Halloween 1 ended, but that was just a dream. It's actually been 2 years. That's plenty of time to develop stronger survival skills, learn how to safely use a gun or non-lethal means of self-defense, or, honestly, wall yourself up inside of a cement bunker that would outlast a nuclear apocalypse. 2 years is a long time. Instead of booking some practice time at the shooting range, however, Laurie instead copes by getting herself a job at a record store and a new group of friends, outcast girls who seem more damaged than her old friend group was. Hot tip: when you're traumatized because some weird loner kid surprised everyone by flipping out and stabbing people, the last thing you should do is start new relationships with strangers who self-identify as other weird loner kids. You know nothing about these girls, Laurie. Sure, it's unlikely that any of them are actually going to turn out to be a psychopathic mass murderer, but better safe than sorry. Stick with Sheriff Brackett. Hang with the guys trained to stop bad guys. I'm not saying cops don't have their issues, but Brackett seems like a genuinely good man with his head on a swivel, and you could use a protector like that right now. You might have less to talk about with him since you have less in common, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that the main thing your new friends will have in common by the end of this movie is matching stab wounds. Dr. Loomis is also back for Halloween 2. His eyeballs have healed up nicely. And as usual, he's exploiting his association with Michael Myers to promote his latest book. His first stop doesn't go great, however. A reporter asks him if he thinks Michael Myers might still be alive since they never found his body. This causes Loomis to have a little panic attack and scream insistently that Myers is dead and nobody has anything to worry about, least of all him. Good to know, good to know. Meanwhile, Michael Myers, totally alive, has another vision that lets the audience know that he sees himself as on a quest to bring his dead family back and reunite them with Laurie, who used to be named Angel, who he calls Boo. It's a little confusing. Regardless, step 1 of his quest is to get beaten up by some random hicks and kill the crap out of them, plus their perfectly nice daughter and their dog, which he eats, mostly just to show that, hey, he still ain't sparing the good people, okay? This ain't your granddad's Halloween. This is Rob Zombie, man. No one is safe. Except, I guess, Dr. Loomis, Laurie Strode, Sheriff Brackett, and Annie Brackett. That's kind of a lot of survivors, actually. You're getting sloppy, Mike. Be better. Dr. Loomis's assistant also wants him to be better, but he keeps on being a pompous ass by doing a photo shoot right in front of the Mike Myers murder mansion. Michael keeps on having visions and Laurie keeps on having nightmares. Yet another kind of damage the two now seem to have in common. Laurie even has a violent seizure after she flashes back to that Halloween almost 20 years ago, when little Michael went on his first killing spree after, that's right, eating candy corn. Gross, dude. Ew. Let's try and remember that that's ultimately what this is all about. Candy corn drives children to kill, and even just thinking about it can give people seizures. Terrible, awful candy. But moving on, Laurie's mental state deteriorates to the point that she starts to go fully off the rails and have screaming episodes, miss her medication, drink too much, fight with Annie, threaten her psych, the works. All while Michael continues his slow walk towards Haddonfield to celebrate another Halloween with his surviving family. Before we get to the next beat, I also need to pause to appreciate just how much Dr. Loomis is begging to be murdered. In fact, if this were almost any other horror movie, he'd be beyond doomed according to traditional horror movie rules. But as we've already seen, Rob Zombie's gone out of his way to present a Michael Myers who's truly incapable of any moral distinction. He'll attack racist, homophobic prison guards, but he'll also attack and eat a dog, and nobody really likes that. So we really can't say that Loomis is cutting his life expectancy short by being a total ass. In fact, being selfish and entitled works out a lot in real life, but for somebody who keeps having paranoid panic attacks in public, you do think he'd invest some of that murder money in a bodyguard or two. Eventually, Michael makes it into town and revisits the strip club where his mom used to dance. He also stomps a random guy's head into mush, which is kind of a dance if you think about it. While hallucinating not just his mom but his younger self as well, he decides only a river of blood can bring them all together again, and brutally kills the other two people in the building to get the whole project started. Later, Loomis is at a book signing when Lindsay's grieving father, that's Laurie's friend that Michael stabbed that did die, pulls a gun on him and gets dragged away by police. Even that doesn't convince him to stop his Twisted Press tour though. He appears on Late Night with Seth Meyers. Get it? Alongside special musical guest Weird Al Yankovic. And we definitely get the sense that Michael isn't too pleased about all of this when he stumbles across a billboard advertising the doctor's book and stomps off in a new direction. Neither is Laurie when she actually reads the book and finds out the whole truth of her past and the fact that Michael Myers is her brother. Reeling from the news, she goes to one of her girlfriend's houses to process and cry it out. That transitions pretty quickly into getting really drunk and going out to party their fears away at some kind of vampire punk Halloween club so clearly designed by Rob Zombie that it's insane. Michael arrives at the party because even if Dr. Loomis badly needs killing, Laurie is always the priority. He warms up by killing some kids in a van who were in the middle of negotiating an awkward threesome, which is probably for the best. Never as fun as you think it's going to be. That delays him enough that Laurie leaves the party though, so next he has to settle for heading over to the sheriff's house and taking out Annie so he can lie in wait for his sister. Laurie and her new pal Maya do eventually come home from the party, only to find the whole place destroyed and Annie sliced up in the bathroom barely alive. Maya runs in to call 911, but that plan is no match for Michael Myers' time-tested strategy of grabbing you from the back of the head all of a sudden, so she goes down quick. I guess in the end, my advice about hiring some bodyguards also wouldn't have slowed Michael down too much. Although he's not explicitly magic or possessed by satanic forces, Michael can absolutely take bullets no problem, get from anywhere to anywhere just by walking like the It Follows monster, and sneak up on almost anyone, even though he's massive. So how do you defend against an armored ninja who doesn't seem to need to eat or sleep? As with most unkillable horror monsters, your efforts should probably go more towards trapping the creature than getting it down to 0 hit points. After all, it is unkillable. We just said that. Maybe take advantage of the fact that Michael compulsively wrecks the walls and ceilings of any room he's in and get a house to collapse on the guy. Or find a way to get him to fall into a deep well or a basement you can fill with cement. Treat him more like toxic waste and less like a panther. You can't kill toxic waste, but it can kill you, so your best bet is to contain it. Of course, that's the last element that makes Mike so scary. He knows no boundaries. He's seemingly uncontainable. So as he chases Laurie across the countryside and Sheriff Brackett comes home to find his daughter dead, we have to wonder if anything will ever stop this John Wick motherfucker. The first guy to pull over to help Laurie sure can't, and his car can't either. Michael flips it over by hand, causing it to catch fire with an unconscious Laurie inside. He pulls her out of the wreckage and carries her like a baby to his imaginary family reunion to be held in a random shack in the middle of nowhere. At this point, both he and Laurie are so psychologically damaged that it actually becomes hard to tell if they're sharing a hallucination or if he's pretending to be their dead mom or what. All we know is that there's a lot of screaming and camera shaking, and then a police helicopter shows up and the cops surround the shack to try and subdue Michael. Loomis sees this happening on the news and, realizing Michael is still alive, rushes to the site, where Sheriff Brackett is already set up with police snipers and everything. He blames Loomis for what happened to his daughter and almost shoots him in a rage. But Loomis breaks away and runs over to the shack, thinking he alone can talk the monster down. He can't though. No. You know that, right? He totally can't. Although it is kind of brave of him, especially considering he was having panic attacks earlier about the mere suggestion Mike might still be at large. It doesn't quite redeem him as a character, but it is something. Loomis goes inside, sees Laurie writhing around, and makes it clear that she is, in fact, hallucinating the Myers family just like Michael is. In reality, there's actually no one holding her down, and she could get up and walk away at any point. Before he can convince her of this, though, Michael's imaginary mommy tells him that it's finally time. And he says the first word he's said since the movie started. So the guy who really needed to get got gets got, and Michael's finally free to be himself, with no mask and nothing to hide. Maybe he will be okay after all. Or not. I think he really is dead now. I think that one's gonna stick. At least until the next reboot anyway. Laurie, the victim, then very slowly picks up Michael's knife and holds it limply in a totally non-threatening manner. She's clearly in shock, dressed as a French maid, covered in blood and still standing, looking down at a dead Dr. Loomis. Despite all of this, Brackett's deputies all of a sudden open fire on her and kill the crap out of her too. Like I said, I'm not saying cops don't have their issues. The track Love Hurts comes in as we fade to a long white tunnel, where Laurie sees her mom coming to meet her with a white horse. This could mean that Michael's violence, symbolized by the white horse, is now hers, since she kind of does a creepy killer smile. Of course, it could also be a metaphor for dying, like she's going down the tunnel and meeting her dead mom in the afterlife. I guess that might make you smile. Frankly, either way, I'm gonna want to see that whole police precinct do some de-escalation and target acquisition training. It feels like Sheriff Brackett's the only one thinking straight, and he just had to look at his daughter's murdered body. Like, can you at least tell the difference between the giant monster man you came here to shoot at and the tiny little girl in the maid outfit who's clearly a threat to nobody? I'm not sure what Laurie could have done better in that situation. Maybe next time you're picking a Halloween costume, go for a knight in armor? Or a samurai or something? Or at least one of those orange hunter's vests, so maybe the cops don't gun you down in a hail of bullets. Now, as for survival tips to get you safely through the events of the Halloween 2 climax, or at least up your chances, maybe it's because I just watched Twisters, but I do feel like everyone should probably invest in one of those drills that comes out of the bottom of your car and drills a hole into the ground to hold your car in place during a tornado. Let's see Michael Myers flip that into a ravine. Or if you can't afford to equip everyone in America with a drill car, maybe do the thing that real-life cops and National Guardsmen might do in a standoff like this, and toss some gas canisters in there. Knock that sucker out if you can, or at least let the snipers do their work and take some nice, clean headshots instead of every cop at the scene just pulling their sidearms and emptying clips across the clearing at each other. That's how you end up with way too much paperwork. If we've learned anything about killing and getting killed from the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, it's that if you're cornered by someone having a psychotic break, talking them down probably isn't a bankable option. Escape first, fight back second, talks sense into them third. Of course, if you happen to be their long-lost sister and they're semi-immortal, you might have a tougher time. That's why it's so important that kids don't get degraded, abused, discarded, exploited, or otherwise treated like garbage. I mean, it's important for a lot of reasons, but the one Rob Zombie's drawing attention to is that you don't want to pump out a bunch of psycho, unkillable serial murders with mask fetishes into the world. And hey, maybe don't rely on the local police or other authorities to keep you safe at all times, even if you do live in the suburbs, and especially if you happen to know that there's a murderer out there who's fascinated with you. Why Laurie didn't pick up some mace or a taser in those 2 years after Mike's first attacks, I will never understand. Rob Zombie's somewhat more grounded take on the Michael Myers story ends up being pretty self-contained in the end. Which is funny because containing was the one thing that they never seemed to be able to get a handle on. Rob leaves it to other writer-directors to find a way to bring Michael back from the dead yet again in the future, and seems satisfied with telling a nice little story about damage and family, and a huge man-child killing lots of innocent people while they're just trying to have some good old-fashioned sexy time. That said, this may be one of the worst franchises we've ever covered in terms of the cast's survival instincts. These people all went down so easy. It's a wonder that the whole saga wasn't just 10 minutes of Michael Myers expertly punching people in the back of the head, dragging them all into a big pile, and chopping them into pieces. Like that bully with a shovel? Fight back, man! You're a bully! In most situations, I'd be rooting against you, but this is just sad. Only Sheriff Brackett had any danger sense whatsoever. Seriously, make that guy the Spider-Man of this universe. He's the only one who can assess threats before it's too late. And before it is too late, make sure to subscribe to the How to Beat channel if you haven't already. Or just leave us a like or a comment letting us know what you thought of the vid, the movies, or what horror franchise you'd like to see us cover next. I'm The Guy, we'll see you in the next video, and have a damn good day.